Hello everybody, my name is Jimmy Smith. I am the owner and founder of West London Wine School, South London Wine School and Streatham Winehouse in London, United Kingdom. Welcome to a session here on understanding Beaujolais for WSET Level 3. This is therefore very much useful for those of you studying your Level 3 certificate, as it will go through all the information that you are required to know and understand about Beaujolais, including semi-carbonic maceration. And then at the end, we will be testing ourselves with a short written question, a working written question that I will run through for you. We've also got included in this video a Google Earth video, which identifies the key villages that you are required to know, plus a load of maps and a load of infographics as well. The picture here is in Beaujolais. This is actually the highest point of Fleury, the village of Fleury. This is La Madone, the church at the top of it, which surveys quite regally its landscape across the northern parts of Beaujolais in the foothills of the Mont de Beaujolais. Okay, so we are talking about Beaujolais, of course, and we are talking about where in France, first up, that we are required to understand. So Beaujolais is a region which is adjoined to the southern part of Burgundy. So just to the north of Beaujolais is the city of Mâcon and the region of the Mâconnais, which is the kind of southern point of Burgundy. So we're below that, in between the city of Mâcon and Lyon, which is the kind of spiritual city of Beaujolais, a real gastronomical hub with a wonderful array of bouchons, some great wine bars where you can get lots of meats and terrines and pâtés, and then the whole Beaujolais gambit. It is rather wonderful. You guys are required to know that this is a continental area. So we classify this as a moderate continental zone. So moderate continental, continental. So it's a moderate continental zone, which is a little bit like the Mâconnais towards the north of this. So therefore, of course, you have seasonality, difference between the seasons of summer and winter. So relatively hot summers and cold winters. We have big diurnal differences as well, and that's quite important for those cold nights retaining acidities. And then the mountains here that start just to the southern part of Mâconnais, which will then turn up into the Massif Central. These are what we call the Mont de Beaujolais. So the Mont de Beaujolais is what protects Beaujolais from the westerly wind. Okay, so moderate continental location. The places that you are required to know. So first of all, let me just identify for you where we were talking about. So we had the city of, which will just be up here, the city of Mâcon, and Lyon will be just off the bottom of this. So I'll pop it down here. So we are in between that area. We have those mountain ranges, like I mentioned. So this is pretty much what shadows this area down here. Okay, and that's important because of any westerly wind that may find its way across this location, and I'll draw that in for you, of course, will be buffered by that effect. So that will come up here. In fact, most of it wouldn't affect this too much anyway, because most of the winds affect over the Loire Valley, the central vineyards heading up towards the Paris Basin. But it does offer that wonderful protection. You also then find, of course, there is altitude, and these mountain ranges, the Beaujolais mountain range, are made of granite. So these are granitic mountain range, which is important because the villages that are nestled into those, which are the four AOCs at the top, are where you find certainly more complex wines. So that's important to understand. So it's something we'll talk about certainly on the grape variety Gamay in a second, but let's go through it now, and we'll go through it again later. The importance, therefore, is that these AOCs, Moulin-Nevent, Fleury, Morgon, and Bruy, and that is from north to south for the ones that you do need to know, these are all found on alternating amounts of granite. Granite is very low in nutrients, so the yield that is produced from these villages is much smaller than generic Beaujolais. As a result, you will end up getting more concentrated wines. There are more intensified wines, which can actually withstand probably something like traditional fermentations or some more skin contact after semi-carbonic maceration. And certainly out of those four, the two big ones are the two M's. So Moulin à Vent, windmill, and Morgon, M for masculine, M for massive. They are the big styles. Then F for feminine is Fleury, which is a bit lighter, and Bruy as well down at the bottom area. You're not required to know anything about history of this area, but places like Bruy was named after Brulius, who was a commander of garrison down here, stationed by Julius Caesar. And there is another village called Julianas, which is named after Julius Caesar. So a lot of important viticultural aspect here dates back to the Roman times. So they are what you call your villages. And in fact, we call them crus. So these are your cru villages. So let's put that up here, put that in capitals up there. So these are your crus, okay? And these will often be the most complex styles. Then around that area, which is in this kind of slightly darker purple, and I'm going to scribble this in blue on the map. So a little bit up here around the city of Beaujolais as well, where it takes its name from, and then this whole area down here, with a few other dotted bits as well. Surrounding those villages is Beaujolais village, once again in granitic areas, and really forming some quite intense wines as well, not as much as the villages. And then finally at the bottom area, the kind of lightest expression that we find of it is Beaujolais, and that is that large expanse which is kind of roughly south of Villefranche-sur-Saône, which is this city, and I'll pinpoint it out for you here, which is just here. And there is a river that runs roughly across here called the Nizarande River. And most of the Beaujolais areas is in fact below that zone. This is mainly low, gentle rolling hills of limestone. And this is why you find some of the most delicate and fresh Beaujolais, generic Beaujolais, including Beaujolais Nouveau, which is new Beaujolais. New Beaujolais is, I mean, the concept of a new wine is something which is done quite a lot over France, but in Beaujolais it's the most famous. This is a wine which is quickly made after it is harvested in September, made in October, and then bottled to be released in November, bearing in mind that most wine is released in the spring following the harvest, but this is actually released on the 3rd Thursday of November. There's a big celebration, big parties and festivals around the world, but majorly here, of course, and it's very light, fragrant, and best drunk young, these fresh Nouveau styles. Okay, so really you're not required to know too much more than that. I'm just going to repeat again the villages, just so you understand those. So I'm going to identify, let's identify by doing an arrow here, and I'll do these in black. So we have out of these crus, we have Morgon and Moulin à Vent, which make the more structured and powerful styles. So I'm going to scribble this down here. So structured and powerful. I think of things like a bit more tannins and more concentration. And then I'll do it in a very lightish pinkish color for the other two. Fleury and Bruy will tend to make the more aromatic and floral styles. So aromatic, floral, and, you know, fresher styles. They're still more complex than generic Beaujolais, but certainly Fleury, the name floral, springs to mind immediately as a translation, and that's why it's that kind of fresher and aromatic style. Okay, so they are some of your villages. We're now going to quickly have a look at this area by looking at a Google Earth video. And this is really nice and really well planned out, this video. So let's have a quick look at this. It's about a 3.5 minute video, and I'll reiterate the things that we've just learnt for this, for instance. So we should be looking at a bit of Lyon, a bit of Beaujolais, Mont Beaujolais, and then the 4 main crus that you are required to know. So we're going to, first of all, zoom in on Lyon, and there it is, the wonderful gastronomical hub of this area with a gorgeous old town, which is littered with these beautiful, there it is, look at that, beautiful, beautiful bouchons, lovely wine bars where you can get lots of charcuterie, meats and cheeses matched with some deliciously wonderful wines. So a real great place and very much a central hub for the Beaujolais Nouveau trade as well. So this is Lyon City with its gorgeous cathedral just located there, and the old ruins of the amphitheatre as well. We're now going up to these areas here, of course, north of Lyon and south of Mâcon. Remember, just to the west of the Saône River, but to the east of the mountains, which is the Massif Central and the Mont de Beaujolais, are these areas. So here we are focusing in on the mountains of Beaujolais, and we're just going across that now. So that is that natural western buffer, and all the wine regions nestle to the east and therefore are protected against that westerly wind. A lovely landscape here, and quite famous because there's a city of Beaujolais where Beaujolais takes its name from, which is also nestled in these hills, where the lords of Beaujolais were very famous for. So that is your Mont de Beaujolais, that protective area. Now we're going to the northern part here. This pinkish area is actually partly Moulin à Vent. And there we go, that says Le Moulin à Vent. And Le Moulin à Vent is a windmill. It's not actually a vintage. It is just south of the area of Chenas, which is a town in this area. But you need to know Moulin à Vent, so it's around a windmill. And it's a rather wonderful area, making some of the most structured and age-worthy expressions of that area. Then we come down to the next one, which is Fleury, which goes into the mountains with some quite high points, so a bit more altitude. And you'll see here, hopefully it's looking at, yes, a picture at the front, remember, at the start. This is La Madone, that church, in that really prominent position, kind of majestically surveying its landscape, which is quite amazing. Fleury makes very aromatic and floral expressions for the most part of Beaujolais cru wine. Okay, so that is the Fleury. Then we head down to our next cru that we are required to know. And this is around the main town of Villers-Morgon and Morgon itself as well. So this is quite famous because it has this very distinctive outcrop of granite. And all of these are granite areas, granite-based areas, but Morgon is very famous for granite. And steep slope, which is called the Côte de Pie, is the most famous. And that makes very powerful structured wines as well in Morgon. And then the final cru that you are required to recognize is around the Mont de Bruy, the mountain of Bruy, which is this forested mountain in the southern tip of the crus. It is the most southern. And the area is around this. This is called Bruy. Bruy is actually the flatter area around it, and then the Côte de Bruy is the bits on the slope. But you just need to realize that Bruy makes quite light again and aromatic wines. Fleury and Bruy are the more lighter aromatic floral styles, and there is that wonderful Mont de Bruy in that picture. Okay, so back to the presentation. And now we're going to talk about the grape variety, which is behind Beaujolais. The full name of the grape is Gamay Noir Jus Blanc. So that is black Gamay with white juice. It's a grape variety which is well suited here. It's early budding and early ripening. So it will, in a moderate climate, this is fine. There are not that many spring frosts here, so it's not that affected. So the early budding nature means that it's actually much more suited towards this area and potentially towards the south as well. So towards the Languedoc into the Ardèche, Gamay is very well suited because of that early budding nature. Gamay is also remarkably consistent and a high yielder. It in fact was attempted to be outlawed by the French aristocracy, including Philip the Bold, which is one of the Dukes of Burgundy, from the late 14th century all the way up to recent times. For several hundred years, this grape variety has been seen as the grape of the peasant or the serf producing mass production, whereas Pinot Noir, of course, was seen as the aristocratical grape variety. But Gamay has found its wonderful true home down here in Beaujolais. It is large yielded and it can produce a lot, often 3 to 4 times the amount of Pinot Noir. So therefore, the very conscious and quality producers will carefully prune their vineyard, very proactive vineyard management and matching the amount of buds, for instance, to the vine vigor. So that is very important. Otherwise, it can grow very consistently. For instance, during the Black Death, where many of the populace was wiped out, Gamay thrived. It did very well because it doesn't need tending to that much. It just grows into big trees with big crops. Pinot Noir, on the other hand, really suffered and lost around 14 vintages, whereas Gamay was consistent and did very well during that time. It is pruned via the Gobelets, which is the bush vine, which this normally has a spur head with two spurs to it, which will shoot two canes. And these are often tied up together, a little bit like a bun, like a haircut. And then that feeds up towards the sunlight, of course. And this is the more traditional way, but some producers are training it towards the guillot system. So that is one single guillot or double guillot for mechanization. And that's certainly for the flatter landscapes down in Beaujolais and the bigger production of Beaujolais. Now, I've mentioned this already. The very best Gamay is most expressive on granite, where it can produce lower yields. It's kind of actually Mother Nature's way of actually taming Gamay naturally by lower nutrients, lower fertility, and therefore lower yields. The wines are more concentrated, and they do tend to have this real kind of more grip to them and tannic note, plus a little bit more of that sort of granitic minerality can come through in the wines, which is quite special. So certainly granite is the best soil for it. What do you tend to find on Gamay? Well, first of all, let's have a look at the bottom of this slide. And you'll see that we are talking about things like tannins here. So low to medium tannins. Normally for most Beaujolais, a lot of Beaujolais Village and Beaujolais Nouveau, certainly it's low tannin. It really does not have much structure or phenolic grip. The acidities do tend to always be quite high across the board. It's a feature of Gamay being related to Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Aligoté, etc. And the bodies will tend to be light, but in the best examples, they can be more medium-bodied. And there are a few full as well, but it tends to be light to medium-bodied. What kind of characters do we expect? Well, Gamay tends to give us a lot of quite considerable red fruit. So you'll see here sort of the strawberry characteristic. Oh, I need an arrow on this, don't I? Here we go. So yeah, the strawberry characteristic, the raspberries here, the red cherries, very, very typical. Maybe some light spice like cinnamon or pepper, but these things like kirsch. And in with that, kirsch is a very ripe, it's a cherry liqueur, a very ripe flavor profile in wine. And if you have kirsch or banana or bubblegum, any of these are actually normally a result of reductive winemaking. That is anaerobic winemaking, which is without oxygen. So that is via the semi-carbonic maceration method. And that will tend to give more of these characteristics. One of the big flavors is ethyl cinnamate, which is the real strawberry note, but almost like what they call in France fraise au vin, so strawberries that have been macerated in wine. It's that kind of characteristic. So that is your Gamay. We're going to talk a little bit now just about the process which WSET quite like you to connect to this style of wine, which is something we call semi-carbonic maceration. So there are many other types of links of production to this. There is a full carbonic maceration where carbon dioxide is pumped into a vat. There's whole bunches. There are some bunch fermentations as well. But we're looking at semi-carbonic maceration. So we'll go through that first of all. So as you can see on this one, an open vat has been filled with grapes. You'll see that you have kind of two layers developing here. And really what you'll find is all the stems are in here as well. They tend to be lighter, so they rise towards the top. But these are whole bunches. So you fill this vat with whole clusters or bunches of grapes without any splitting, because you want them to be full. And then underneath the pressure, because this vat is fairly large, underneath that pressure, the grapes at the bottom, as it says here, will crush underneath the weight. It's exactly the same thing that can happen prematurely when you're picking grapes in two larger containers. Grapes at the bottom will feel the weight and start to split. But this is actually wanted. And those grapes then will start to split, as its picture is trying to depict. And those grapes, therefore, will basically free their juice. And the ambient yeast, which is found, remember, on the skin of the grape, will actually begin a fermentation down at this lower part of the vat. So it will start to eat this juice that has been liberated from the grape. Now that will produce carbon dioxide, as we all know. And that carbon dioxide will push all of our, let's get a pen for this, there we go. So that will push all of our oxygen out of this vat, and it pushes it out, it sort of cleanses it out, and then it is sealed. The top will be sealed, and you have an environment which is really quite toxic for all the living organisms within there, because this is a carbon dioxide rich environment that is lacking in oxygen. So this means you've got, of course, the conditions, very interesting conditions, where the cells, the enzymatic cells, start to eat themselves. So this, therefore, they start to eat themselves, and this is an anaerobic environment, and they start to undergo a maceration in that. And this brings out some of the juice from those pips and grapes at the top. And it brings out a bit of color, but not too much. This is generally lower temperatures than a fermentation would be for a red wine, but this process will still produce, because there's a fermentation at the bottom, still produce a bit of heat, but generally less colors and less tannic extraction here. Some acidities will be brought out, but this process really doesn't bring a huge amount of characters. It brings more flavors and aromas in this very interesting environment. The intact berries, as I just mentioned, begin to split and release their juice. The free run juice then, so that juice that comes out is vatted off. That will then go through a normal fermentation off the skins with yeast. So yeast will be added to that, and that will be fermented. The remaining grapes that are left behind, which still maintain some of the juice, will then be pressed. And depending on when it is pressed, depending on the time it's pressed after vatting, it will create more structure, more tannin will seep out, more flavor and more color will come out as well, because it's found in the skins. The press wine and the non-press wine, so the free run wine, will be blended. The free run wine is the wine that has gone through a normal yeast fermentation. The press wine is actually one that's gone through a biochemical enzymatical transformation, and that's why it's called a semi-carbonic. So a part of it is a yeast-driven fermentation and a part of it is not, and that is why it's called semi-carbonic maceration. The longer time on the skins will be more for the complex crus like the Morgon and Moulin à Vent that we've talked about. So let's put that to practice. We've got a few questions here which they're going to ask you about the wines of this area. The grape variety Gamay can often produce simple and light wines in Beaujolais. From the vineyard, so thinking about the vineyard characteristics, how would you ensure a more complex and structured wine? So what would you do in the vineyard to get a more powerful wine? Okay, so first up, well, in fact, this is the main decision here. This is the main answer for 4 marks. We know that Gamay is a high-yielding grape variety. Okay, so being a high-yielding grape variety, that will not make complex and structured wines. It normally make light, fresh, and early consumption wines. So this nature of it being high-yielding means that we're going to have to reduce that. So we would source the fruit from low nutrient granitic soils. Or you could say something like granite soils with low nutrients, however you want to word that. And that's found in the mountain foothills in the northwest of the region. Now, that's not actually mentioned in your book, but it is something you are required to know. A mountain range like this will normally be this volcanic nature, which is granitic. So it's often going to be, therefore, in the mountain or in the foothills, which is the lowest part of the mountains. And this would produce lower yields of more concentrated wines, for example. That will be enough to get your 4 marks on that question. Here we have a label from the very successful and large producer of Georges Duboeuf. This is a Beaujolais Nouveau, which is that very young and quite quickly made Beaujolais, released on the 3rd Thursday of November. This is consumed normally mainly during the festival time, so in November, December, and consumed in quite vast quantities. It's giving you a description of the wine here. The wine is light in body and tannin with red berry fruit, kirsch, banana, and some sweet spices. In the winery, what method of production would you employ to achieve this style? And this style would be semi-carbonic maceration. You could also have just carbonic maceration as well as an answer. That is a full carbon maceration where carbon dioxide is pumped into a vat. Describe this process, and they rather like this. You would normally get a Beaujolais part written question as a part of a Burgundy question. So you might be asked about 15 questions on mark questions on Burgundy, and then about 10 maybe on Beaujolais. So describing that process, which we've just gone through, an open vat is filled with whole bunches of grapes or whole clusters of grapes, whatever terminology you want to use there. And the pressure crushes the berries at the bottom of the vat. The ambient yeast, that's the natural yeast you're finding on those skins, then begins fermentation, giving off carbon dioxide. And the vat is sealed to produce an anaerobic environment that is without oxygen. So make sure we understand that terminology. Remember, WSET rather likes you to remember these. So that is here. Without O2. Okay, and the remaining grapes undergo a carbonic maceration, intracellular transformation or fermentation. That's what they call those processes. So that's where the juice is actually extracted from those skins, from the grape rather. The intact berries begin to split and release their juice. That is what we've just been talking about. The free run juice is vatted off and fermented with yeast, so that is off the skins, and the press wine is left in contact with the skins, and the longer time more for complex wines like Crus, for instance. They do say that sort of generic Beaujolais is a few days after vatting, and then the Crus might be like 10 to 14 days is what common knowledge is found about that. Okay, so that is the end of our Beaujolais question and our Beaujolais section for Understanding Beaujolais for WSET Level 3. We have several more of these videos on our channel, which means you can revise at home and you can revise with full confidence and with practice questions. If you do have any comments or questions, please do get in touch either in the comment section below this video or with me at Wine with Jimmy on Instagram and Twitter. Also on Facebook at West London Wine, which is the wine school that I own and run. South London Wine is my second school, and Streatham Wine House is my wine bar down in Streatham in London. Next time you're in London, please come and see us for a class, a glass, or even a bottle. Thank you so much. I've been Jimmy Smith from at Wine with Jimmy, and I will see you very soon. Thank you. Bye.